Lives Less Ordinary is the podcast from the BBC World Service, bringing you extraordinary personal stories from around the globe. Search for Lives Less Ordinary wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hello, and thanks for listening to this episode of the Documentary Podcast from the Assignment team. Newspapers are great, aren't they? I mean, actual physical newspapers where you have to turn the pages because you find stuff that you might not notice on an app. That's how I found this story, leafing through a paper one morning earlier this year. A remarkable story about a man called Arne Zemsrot doing a remarkable thing. Enjoy the podcast.
So what does the ticket cost?
So I gotta get a ticket both for me and for my bike. So it's $3.20, and then for my bike it's another $2.20. So that's $5.40. I am lucky enough to be able to pay that, but that's already a lot.
You're listening to the documentary on the BBC World Service. I'm Tim Mansell, and I'm about to get on a train with Arne Zemsrot, a journalist and activist here in Berlin. Okay, which way are we going?
So we'll take a few stations on the Ringbahn and we'll head east.
This line is a loop, it just runs in a circle all day, doesn't it?
Yeah, so that's the line that is frequented most, I would say, in Berlin. Which also means this is the one most likely to run into ticket inspectors.
How often would you say you run into a ticket inspector?
In Berlin, I would say if you go without a ticket for a week, you're pretty certain that you get caught. Which is different in other cities. So Hamburg, for example, is much more relaxed about that. And you can see that in their prisons as well. So there's way more people in prison for riding without a ticket in Berlin, and in Hamburg it's almost nobody.
Yes, you heard that right. Prison. People in Germany go to prison for travelling on public transport without a ticket. And not just a few people, several thousand a year. In this edition of Assignment, we're going to be hearing about a campaign to change that. A campaign to make sure that in future, no one goes to prison for not paying their fare. A wet morning in Cologne, several hundred kilometres west of Berlin, on the River Rhine. I'm on the tram. And yes, I have got a ticket.
Nächster Halt. Universität.
I'm getting off at the university where I'm meeting Nicole Bürgerlein. She's in the law faculty here, a criminologist. How many people in Germany are sent to prison every year for not buying a ticket on public transport?
The number is around 7,000 to 8,000 people each year.
7,000 to 8,000?
Yeah, that's right. Most of them will end up in prison because in the first phase they are sentenced to pay a fine, but they won't pay it, and so they will end up in prison for non-payment of a fine. But there is also a number that are sent to prison directly or that have been convicted to a probational prison sentence, but they failed their probation and that will turn into a prison sentence instead.
So broadly, of those 7,000 a year who are sent to prison for not having bought a ticket, are you able to estimate roughly how many of those would be sent directly to prison and how many of those would end up in prison because they didn't then pay the fine?
It would be around 500 a year that are sent to prison directly and a few more who didn't fulfill their suspended sentence, and then the rest will be fines.
Can you just explain how that works? If I don't buy a ticket and somebody taps me on the shoulder and says, "Where's your ticket?" and I don't have one, what happens next?
So you will have to pay 60 euros, which is a higher fare for the ticket you haven't bought. And then there's a second issue. They will also register that you didn't have a ticket, and if that happens again and again, after 3 times, they will hand over your case to the prosecutor.
Even if I've paid that extra €60?
Yes, that is unrelated to the €60. That is because it's actually a criminal offence if you don't have a ticket, and so you will end up at the prosecutor's office.
The law that made this a criminal offence dates back to the 1930s, the early years of the Nazi regime. Defrauding an individual was already an offence, but the law didn't apply to recently introduced mechanical devices like public telephones or ticket machines. Nearly a century later, paragraph 265A is still on the statute book. Are you able to say anything about the people who are sent to prison for this offence?
Yes. What we can say about them in general is that they are mostly poor and in very difficult circumstances.
Ja, das hier ist natürlich unsere Anlaufstelle hier.
This is Gisa Merz, a small, fragile-looking woman in her mid-50s, and her large, energetic black Labrador, Baloo. Gisa has straggly grey-blonde hair and the air of someone who's lived a hard life, but she has a big smile. So, where are we going?
Der Weg von der Stadtführung, da gehen wir immer hier lang.
Okay.
Meistens sind so 16.
I've made the short trip from Cologne up to the city of Dusseldorf. We're on the streets that stretch away south of the main station. This is where Gisa works, selling a street magazine called 50/50.
Deswegen ist das Viertel auch immer dieses Bahnhofsviertel immer so nicht so schön.
As Gisa says, it's not the most, shall we say, elegant part of the city, but that's the point. Gisa also acts as a tour guide for the street magazine. Not the kind of tour that takes you to the art gallery and the opera house, but one that shows you the underbelly, the city that the homeless inhabit.
So, jetzt sieht man ja auch schon nach vorne die roten Bänke.
Yeah,
Ja,
these red benches up ahead of us.
und da sind noch keine Unterbrechungen.
Okay, so Gisa's just pointing out ahead of us there are some benches on the street painted red. And she was saying that a lot of benches nowadays are built in such a way that you can no longer lie down on them. But these are some of the few left in Düsseldorf where it's possible still to sleep if you're homeless.
Und da, wo dieses Apothekenzeichen ist, da in dem Haus ist der Methadonarzt, wo ich auch jahrelang hingegangen bin.
So here on the left,
Ja, ja.
okay, there's a doctor over there, and this is where Gisa says she used to come for her methadone. Gisa is a recovering heroin addict. She herself has lived on the street. And she has been to prison for travelling on the train in Düsseldorf without a ticket.
Ja, ich bin im Methadon-Programm gewesen. Das ist diese Ersatzdroge für Heroin.
I was on methadone, the drug they give you instead of heroin, and you have to go to the clinic every day to take it. I didn't have a ticket, but I had to get there before I started to get withdrawal symptoms, so I just got on the train. What else could I do? And there were ticket inspectors on the train.
Man kriegt ja zwar Hartz IV hier oder vom Jobcenter Geld.
Okay, I was getting unemployment benefit, but a ticket costs €3.10. And if you look at what else you have to spend money on, electricity, telephone, and so on, it was the end of the month and I didn't have any money left.
Gisa was given a 6-month prison sentence, suspended for 3 years. But she broke the terms of her sentence, and at the beginning of November last year, she found herself behind bars. Can you tell me what it was like to be in prison?
Man kommt in Haft, man wird dem Arzt vorgeführt, der sagt dann...
You arrive in prison and you get taken to the doctor and he says, okay, I'll give you 3 milligrams of methadone. So you get 3 milligrams for a couple of days, then maybe 2.5 for another couple of days. You get weaned off it and then that's it, you don't get any more. And that's when the withdrawal symptoms start. Stomach cramps, diarrhea, pain in your joints, the shivers, and you just got to get through it. And they just don't care.
Weil ich hatte so Schmerzen und mich so übergeben und ich bin ja auch nicht viel.
I was in such pain and I kept throwing up. There's not much of me. I weigh maybe 50 kilos, so I said I need something for the nausea. So they gave me a tablet and I threw that straight up and that was it. I just had to get on with it. But there were other people there who start cutting themselves or eating tobacco just so they can get out and see a normal doctor.
As soon as Giza was arrested, 50/50 started to campaign for her release. They recruited local celebrities and held demonstrations outside government buildings. A national news magazine ran a piece with a picture of her in prison, her frailty apparent in an oversized hoodie. The Old Town in Düsseldorf is where the tourists come. It's a network of narrow streets full of bars and restaurants that back onto the river. And this is where Wolfgang Siefert lives, in a small flat with large windows. He too spoke out on Giza's behalf.
What should I call you? Herr Siefert? Pater Siefert?
The usual is Pater Wolfgang.
Father Wolfgang.
Okay, Father Wolfgang. Yeah, that's a usual thing in Britain, yeah.
Father Wolfgang is retired now, but he spent 30 years as a prison chaplain. He's a cheerful man in his 70s with a bald head and a white, stubbly beard. A man of long experience with prison inmates serving time for not buying a train ticket.
The problem in the prison system is that you need several months to climatize yourself. You need months to get knowledge about how to come to a group or to a football team or to educational things that are offered in the prison. So it means for people who come for 4 months, sometimes they stay the whole day in their room. That's senseless.
Did you have conversations with prison staff, with the leadership of the prison, about the difficulties presented by people who come to prison for minor offences and for a short time?
I was a member of the national board of the prison chaplains, and whenever I met directors of prisons or authorities of the prison system, we had the same opinion that there is no sense in sentences for minor offences when the people were imprisoned for, let's say, several months.
What's the actual effect on somebody who spends a short time in prison and then comes out onto the street again?
I accompanied a lot of people after they have been in prison. Usually they lost a lot. They lost, of course, their income. They lost sometimes all their social contacts. They lost sometimes their flat, oftentimes their work, and usually a lot or even all their confidence and self-confidence.
You've been quite publicly associated with the campaign to have Giza Merz get out of prison. Why did you get involved with that?
Now it's exactly 29 years ago that I took over the responsibility of a prisoner's magazine. And since 1994, we have the theme that it is unjust to bring people for minor offenses to prison.
So this is not a new issue?
No. Sometimes it's really depressing to see that since 20 or 25 years, a lot of responsible argue the same way, having the same opinion. Nothing has changed.
This wasn't the first time Giza Merz had been in prison, but she hadn't been in trouble for 7 years. I've got one of her court documents here, and there's a string of previous convictions. Many of them have to do with drugs. There are several more instances of using public transport without paying for it, and one offence involving violence. She doesn't seem particularly repentant about that one.
Also ich bin Fußballfan und leider auch nicht so ein harmloser.
I'm a football fan. Sadly not one of the quiet ones. Fortuna Düsseldorf, obviously.
Deswegen hatte ich auch nicht so viel Angst, auf der Straße zu leben, weil ich mich wehren kann.
For that reason, I wasn't so frightened of living on the street because I know how to look after myself. Most women don't know how to do that. They said I'd attacked a policewoman with a bottle. It wasn't really like that, but that's the way the judge saw it.
Ich bin früher schwarz, erstmal war es mir egal.
Yeah, I travelled without a ticket all the time. I didn't care. I was on the train in the first place because that's where you could buy the drugs. And anyway, you're so befuddled by drugs, you really don't give a damn. For me, it was heroin and cocaine.
Beuselstraße.
Berlin is full of places with a sombre history. One of them is a few minutes' walk from the station at Beuselstraße, a memorial in a courtyard that backs onto a high wall topped with razor wire.
Yeah, we're in the prison complex of Plötzensee in Berlin.
I'm with the journalist and activist Arne Zemsrott.
Plötzensee is particularly identified with the Nazi period. There are some boards over here which tell us that something like 3,000 people were executed by the Nazis here in Plötzensee.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the former central execution place of Berlin, and about 1/3 of the people who were executed after a death sentence in Nazi Germany were actually executed here.
It's now 2023. The prison's still in use.
The prison is still in use and sometimes in overuse, if you can say that. It's regularly full. About 1/3 of everybody in this prison is here because they couldn't afford a ticket for the train or for the bus, or who have dealt some other minor offences and were sentenced to fines, and all of them couldn't pay their fines.
You're saying 1/3 of the inmates here are here for these offences of travelling on public transport without a ticket or not paying a fine for a relatively minor offence.
That's correct. So you would think
Arne
that
is
people who
campaigning
were
for a
imprisoned
change in the law. He wants to see paragraph 265A, the one that sends people to prison for travelling without a ticket, struck from the statute book. As part of this campaign, he's founded an organisation called the Freedom Fund, through which he does something rather startling. He buys people out of prison.
We actually pay the fines for people who are imprisoned, and in that moment, when we pay it, people can actually walk free.
The first time Arne did this, he arrived at Plötzensee with 20,000 euros in cash. A year and a half later, it's all done digitally.
And where does this money come from?
So we're all financed just by donations of private individuals. We have gathered around 800,000 euros in the past year and a half.
So you've raised 800,000 euros, and how many people have you paid for?
So we have bought out about 850 people, and we could free so many more because we get emails and letters each and every day from people who are imprisoned, from their spouses, but actually most of the times it's from prisons themselves. Prisons love the Freedom Fund.
That's quite extraordinary that somebody arrives in a prison and the prison administration writes to you and says, we've got prisoner X here, can we have some money please, and we'll send him home.
There's actually some prisons where the Freedom Fund forms are lying there at the entrance, right? And then the prison will be like, oh, you're here for riding without a ticket, here's a form, please fill that out and we'll try to free you the next day. On one point, the state criminalizes people, and then on the other side, the same state comes to a civil society organization and is asking them for help to correct this, which really shows you the absurdity of it all.
Arne calculates that based on the daily cost of keeping someone in prison, he's saved the state more than 12 million euros.
Is this primarily a social project? You want to help the people in German society at least able to help themselves, or is it more broadly a political project?
The Freedom Fund is a political project for sure. For example, a lot of prisons have tried to make us part of the structure by inviting us to prison meetings and so on. And we have always said no, because what is our goal is to make it happen that nobody has to go to prison anymore.
Now, I don't think you're popular with the public transport companies. The public transport companies say that without this law, there's no deterrent.
So we have tried to get in touch with a lot of public transport companies, but they won't talk to us. And they paint this picture of total chaos if it wasn't a criminal offense to ride without a ticket, which is totally absurd. If you go without a ticket, then you have to pay 60 euros. Everybody knows that, and that will be the case afterwards as well.
Dear passengers, please stand clear of the yellow area by the doors so that the train can depart on time.
Back on the train, guess what happens?
That's mine.
Someone asks to see our tickets.
So that was a young woman in a denim jacket. She didn't look like a ticket inspector, no uniform. Unfortunately, we both had tickets.
Well, because we can afford the tickets, right? Yeah.
Schönhauser Allee.
So what do the public transport companies have to say about this? Well, none of the ones I approach want to comment on the possibility of the law being abolished.
Sehr geehrte Fahrgäste, der Zug S1 nach Mannsee verspätet sich wenige Minuten.
But one of them refers me to the VDV, the industry's umbrella organisation. They send me a statement quoting the head of the organisation as being, and I quote, vehemently opposed to any change in the law. Their spokesman, Lars Wagner, agrees to meet me at Potsdamer Platz, one of Berlin's busiest stations.
Do you have any data on how much it costs the German public transport system every year in people who travel without buying a ticket?
We don't have a valid data because we don't get all of them, but we calculate with around 300 million per year.
300 million euros a year across the whole country.
That's true, yeah.
Do you know how many people are caught every year for not buying a ticket?
No, not really. We don't count that, and I don't have an idea if anybody counts that.
I think we can assume there are hundreds of thousands of people every year who...
That's for sure. That's for sure, yeah.
What happens to somebody who is caught on an underground train here in Berlin without a ticket?
In Axis you have to pay 60 euros, which is far, far more than the ticket would cost.
Right. And not only do you have to pay 60 euros, you have to pay 60 euros in public. People see you. It's quite humiliating.
Often they don't care about that. Yeah. What they care about is they have to pay 60 euros because that is a lot of money for only one ride with a bus or a train.
Which leads me to the question, why is it important that there remains this law that you can go to prison for not buying a ticket? It seems very extreme.
It seems extreme. Maybe it is extreme and it's not happening all the time. But if you're doing it several times, then we are like, okay, the 60 euros seems not to be enough, so we have to do more to get these people scared of being caught again.
But we know that most of these people, the people who are habitual offenders, are people who genuinely cannot afford to pay for a ticket.
Those will not get into prison, at least, or only some of them.
Actually, as we've heard, several thousand of those habitual offenders are in prison.
Do you think if people were no longer prosecuted, it would lead to an epidemic of people travelling without a ticket?
I don't know.
But your organisation is clear that the existence of this law is an effective deterrent.
Yes, for sure.
Gisa Merz likes to say she's the most famous fare dodger in Germany. She's probably right.
Gisa ist eine ehemalige Obdachlose aus meinem Wahlkreis in Düsseldorf.
Her name even came up in the German parliament, the Bundestag, earlier this year. The speaker was a Düsseldorf member, Sander Martins. She said that sending someone like Gisa to prison demonstrated that the law was a nonsense.
We heard about this case here in Düsseldorf at last autumn, And we made a statement as Social Democrats here in Düsseldorf saying that's not okay. If that's the law we are having right now, then we have to change that law.
And then you actually met Gisa Merz the day she came out of prison at the beginning of March.
Yeah, it was very interesting for me to meet her. And I was very surprised that Gisa was very engagiert.
She was cheerful, energetic, lively.
Yeah. Perhaps because she was out of the prison and the way she described her situation and why did she travel without a ticket. And I found it very good that she told that in the press conference.
Is it possible, is it likely during this parliament that this law will indeed be taken off the criminal statute book?
I hope so. And I think the signals that I perceive are positive. I think and I hope that we could get this law done and through the German Bundestag till the next election, 2025.
In Düsseldorf, meanwhile, things have already changed. Now, if you get caught without a ticket, you'll still have to pay that €60 penalty. But you no longer run the risk of ending up in front of a judge. The order came from the City Council, and the Transport Authority has told the BBC that, for the time being at least, it will no longer be referring offenders for prosecution. The publicity around Gisa's case seems to have played a significant role here. Gisa herself, 6 months after her release, says she's doing well.
Ich habe eine neue Wohnung. Ich mache noch 50-50. Ich mache die Stadt.
I've got a new flat, I'm selling the street magazine, and I'm doing the guided tours. That's my life at the moment.
And will you travel without a ticket again, do you think?
Ich kriege jetzt ein Ticket gesponsert.
Someone's sponsoring my ticket now. An old lady, and she pays for it every month. I'm so grateful for that. It means that now I don't have to worry that I haven't paid when I get on the train.
Dass ich irgendwie noch mal schwarz fahre.
Attention please. We are now approaching the last stop on the line. All passengers are requested to leave the train.
That's all from Assignment. It was produced and presented by me, Tim Mansell. The editor is Penny Murphy.